My unfaithful wife worked as company manager for years, but made an exception for one young guy, promoting him above me. She said, "It's just business." But days later, I froze all company funds while she sent thousands of messages begging. I just told her, "Sup Reddit, my name is Blake Carter, and I spent 7 years of my life working at Sterling Dynamics." I can still remember walking into that lobby on my first interview, eager as hell and nervous, absolutely convinced this was where I'd finally prove myself. Looking back now, I realize that was both the beginning of my greatest professional achievement and my most painful betrayal. Over those 7 years, I stayed late countless nights polishing proposals with an almost obsessive attention to detail. I crafted pitches so persuasive that clients sometimes asked to speak only with me directly. When the firm landed its first major international account, I personally organized all the travel logistics and delivered a presentation that turned skeptics into believers. I sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, and entire weekends, all to ensure Sterling thrived. Each success felt like a victory, not just for the company, but for my wife, Victoria Sterling. She would beam with pride watching her right-hand man work tirelessly behind the scenes. As she climbed from senior director to COO and ultimately CEO, I celebrated alongside her every step of the way. I never questioned that my own sacrifices would reap equal reward someday. That reward should have been the obvious next step, the promotion to Chief Strategy Officer. It was a title that would cement my place in the firm's history, recognition for years of dedication and results. Instead, I learned the truth behind the closed boardroom door in the most humiliating way possible. I stood behind that frosted glass, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum announcing an invasion, as Victoria concluded what I thought was my promotion meeting. When she emerged, her eyes avoided mine completely. Her posture was stiff with an apology she hadn't yet voiced. She placed a hand on my arm in an awkward gesture that felt half affection, half obligation. Her voice trembled when she said, "The position went to Ryan Torres." She paused, searching my face for understanding I did not feel. "Nothing personal," she whispered, as if the phrase alone could smooth over years of devotion. Ryan Torres, 24 years old, fresh from business school, whose name she had dropped once while bragging to friends about her new boyfriend. Ryan, the handsome young man who carried her gym bag to the cliffside, runs she sponsored in press photos. I felt the betrayal as sharply as a physical blow, my vision narrowing to the painful thrum of blood in my ears. In that moment, my mind began to race through all the memories that suddenly felt like lies. I recalled each late-night conversation in our living room, mapping out financial projections on her laptop while she leaned against my shoulder. I remembered how she once described me to investors as her secret weapon. Those exact words. Where was the secret now? And who wielded the weapon? My thoughts spiraled as I remembered all the sacrifices I had made with such pride. The weekend I skipped Jacob's soccer final to finalize a crucial supply chain deal in Tampa. The anniversaries I spent on conference calls instead of sharing intimate meals at dinner. All those moments I had justified as investments in our shared future, our combined success. But pride quickly gave way to something much colder. I stepped toward Victoria, forcing my expression to remain completely calm, despite the storm raging inside me. I touched her hand back briefly, feeling the distance between us grow infinitely in that single moment of contact. "Congratulations to Ryan," I said, my voice low and even, betraying nothing of the anger coiled inside me like a spring ready to snap. She blinked, clearly surprised that I could muster a polite smile in the face of such devastating news. "I hope he earns it," she nodded, relief flooding her face as though I had graciously accepted what was essentially a professional insult. But I had promised myself in that very instant that this would be the last time Sterling Dynamics swallowed everything I was worth without consequence. Later that evening, as the city lights blurred beneath the airplane wings during my business trip, I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind. My hotel room felt colder than any boardroom I had ever sat in. I stared at the ceiling, counting the scrollwork patterns in the plaster until dawn broke through the curtains. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I was going to do. My loyalty had been mistaken for weakness. My devotion had been mistaken for servitude. I refused to continue being the invisible architect of someone else's glory. I rose quietly from the uncomfortable hotel bed and brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Then I reviewed files on my encrypted laptop, files detailing 15 separate corporations I had built from scratch over the years. These entities operated in sectors ranging from analytics to supply chain management, each one a top client of Sterling Dynamics. Each was registered under different names and addresses to ensure professional distance and avoid any conflicts of interest. Without my efforts and these carefully cultivated relationships, those contracts would dissolve like sugar cubes in water. As I drafted the first of 15 termination notices, I felt no remorse, only a glimmer of exhilaration. My hands moved swiftly across the keyboard as I typed the words that would change everything. Dear company name, we regret to inform you that effective immediately, Sterling Dynamics will terminate service level agreement number X. Each email carried the weight of years of unacknowledged effort. Every subject line was a calculated strike, severing ties that had contributed 68% of Sterling's total revenue. By the time I clicked send on the final notice, the sun had climbed high above the skyline outside my hotel window. I sat back and poured another cup of dark roast, savoring the bitter taste. I had learned something important that morning. Loyalty might be rewarded or it might be exploited. Today, I had chosen to tip the scales. I deliberately chose not to attend the morning meeting at the firm's glossy headquarters. Instead, I watched alerts pop up on my phone from the comfort of my hotel room. Client inquiries flooded in, followed by frantic questions from account managers who couldn't understand what was happening. The faintest tremor of panic was already seeping through every message, and I could practically feel the chaos building from hundreds of miles away. When I finally strolled into the lobby at noon, my tailored suit felt lighter on my shoulders. My posture was more upright than it had been in years of dutiful service. The firm I had helped build was hemorrhaging revenue in real time, and the board had no idea whom to blame for the disaster unfolding before their eyes. As I passed through the revolving doors, I looked forward past Ryan Torres's startled gaze and past Victoria's forced composure. I was looking into a future where recognition was no longer a courtesy to be begged for, but a standard I would command myself. You see, people thought I was just a loyal husband playing second fiddle at Sterling Dynamics. They saw the doting man in the tailored suits standing quietly behind his powerhouse CEO wife. The Mr. Sterling, who smiled in press photos, poured wine at client dinners, and conveniently disappeared when the flashbulbs faded. But what they didn't know, what Victoria never told them, was that I wasn't just supporting her from the sidelines. I was the architect of every single major deal that kept that company afloat. There are the public faces of companies, the CEO handshakes, and photo ops that make it into Forbes magazine. And then there are the hands that actually hold everything together behind the scenes. I was the latter, always working in the shadows while others basked in the spotlight. While Victoria smiled for magazine photographers and shook hands with Silicon Valley elites at networking events, I was back at the office at 3 in the morning rewriting contracts line by line. I was renegotiating licensing agreements that could make or break entire divisions. I was drafting operational blueprints so airtight that even the most aggressive regulators didn't blink when they reviewed our compliance. Every major client Sterling had brought in during the last 4 years. I had scouted them, courted them, and closed them. More importantly, I had insulated them legally, financially, and structurally to protect both their interests and ours. What no one at Sterling knew, not even Victoria, was that I had built an intricate web of influence and control. 15 companies. 15 separate entities, each registered under different holding firms and licensing umbrellas across 5 states. Tech startups, logistics firms, AI analytics companies, supply chain integrations, fleet management services, distribution platforms. I had quietly assembled a diverse portfolio that touched every corner of modern business. These weren't dummy corporations or shell companies designed to hide assets. They were real, functioning, profit-generating machines with genuine employees and legitimate business operations. The common thread tying them all together was Sterling Dynamics as their primary service provider. I had made sure my companies became their biggest clients because if I couldn't get the credit I deserved inside Sterling, I would control the company's fate from the outside. It all started small. Just a back-end analytics firm I quietly acquired using my personal savings and some strategic investments. I routed a project through this company to Sterling for evaluation, presenting it as an external opportunity that had come across my desk. They absolutely loved the proposal. The board signed a year-long agreement without hesitation, praising the innovative approach and competitive pricing. They never even knew I was behind it. That rush of seeing them enthusiastically praise something I had built while having no idea it was mine. It did something profound to me. It gave me a clarity I had never experienced before. I wasn't being overlooked by accident or circumstance. I was being actively used, my contributions systematically minimized while others took credit for my work. So I kept building, one strategic acquisition and one carefully crafted contract after another. I wrapped my hands around the company from the outside, creating a web of dependencies they never saw coming. Sterling became increasingly dependent on my network of companies, relying on them more than anyone in leadership ever realized. But here's the thing. I didn't pull the plug back then. I wasn't cruel or vindictive by nature. I thought maybe, just maybe, Victoria would eventually see me for who I really was. Not just as the supportive husband, the helpful advisor behind closed doors, or the reliable man who handled logistics. I hoped she would recognize me as her equal, as the co-creator of what Sterling had become under her leadership. Instead, she gave my hard-earned promotion to a boy fresh out of business school, a boy she was sleeping with on the side, a boy who had never stayed up through a brutal deadline with red-rimmed eyes and 3 cups of coffee coursing through his bloodstream, fighting to meet impossible client demands. A boy who had never sacrificed a single weekend or missed a single family event for the company's success. She didn't just ignore my worth, she actively erased it. She handed my future to someone who had contributed nothing, while relegating me to the shadows where I had always worked. So the morning after she gave my title away and called it nothing personal, I didn't cry or rage or drink myself into oblivion. I didn't call a lawyer or threaten a lawsuit. Instead, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, just like I always did. I shaved, showered, and brewed a mug of coffee strong enough to peel paint from the walls. Then I walked into my home office with the same methodical precision I had used to build empires in secret. I logged into 15 different client portals, opened 15 separate dashboards, and carefully reviewed analytics, client satisfaction scores, and service-level audits for each company. Everything was clean and running smoothly. Everything was working exactly as designed. That somehow made what I was about to do easier. There would be no loose ends, no excuses, no claims of poor performance. Then I began scheduling the termination notices. 15 separate emails, one for each company in my carefully constructed network. I templated the language to sound professional and final. This notice serves as formal termination of our existing SLA with Sterling Dynamics, effective immediately. We regret that due to recent instability in leadership and breach of confidence, our companies no longer share aligned values. We appreciate the years of partnership and wish you the best in your future endeavors. Each message was tailored with just enough variation to prevent anyone from suspecting they were coordinated. I spread the delivery times strategically across the morning. Some scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock, others staggered to hit inboxes between 9:03 and 9:12. I didn't want a sudden burst that might look like a system glitch. Instead, I orchestrated a steady leak, like a puncture in a pressurized tank that would slowly but inevitably drain everything. I looked out the window of my home office as I prepared to execute the plan. The city below was just beginning to wake up. Horns blaring in the distance, sunlight bouncing off the mirrored surfaces of downtown high-rises like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in the middle of all that urban chaos, Victoria was probably smoothing her hair in the mirror, completely unaware that the floor beneath her company was about to dissolve. I wasn't smiling as I sat there with my finger hovering over the send button. There was no joy in what I was about to do, only a sense of cold inevitability. These weren't just termination notices I was about to send. They were reminders. Reminders that I wasn't just a loyal husband in a pressed suit who happened to work at the same company. I was the reason she had a company to lead in the first place. By 8:59, my hands hovered over the keyboard for one final review. 15 windows open, one neat row of tabs across my screen. I opened my email client and confirmed the scheduled delivery times. Each message was locked and loaded, ready to detonate on schedule. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the first email dropped into Sterling's general inbox. By 9:02, 2 more had arrived. By 9:07, I had already received the first confused response from a Sterling account manager. Urgent client requesting immediate call regarding sudden SLA cancellation. Flagged for leadership attention. By 9:10, the CTO was texting me directly. By 9:11, Victoria's assistant was calling my phone. By 9:12, Victoria herself had sent me a message. "Blake, what's happening?" I turned my phone face down and kept sipping my coffee, savoring each bitter sip. They weren't ready for this devastating blow, and it wasn't because I had hidden anything from them. It was because they had never bothered to ask what I was building while they systematically ignored my contributions. All those glossy presentations with Victoria's name prominently displayed on the front slide. I had written every single word. The deals that saved Sterling during the economic collapse of 2020. I had negotiated every clause and condition. I had been the scaffolding behind their gleaming skyscraper, the invisible infrastructure that held everything together. And they had just torn me out completely, somehow assuming the building would continue to stand without its foundation. At 9:17, I opened Sterling's official Slack account from my personal laptop and watched as the panic spread in real time. Messages were flying back and forth. Did anyone approve this? Why weren't we warned about these cancellations? Who owns these companies? The confusion was palpable, even through digital text. By 9:30, the CFO had called me and left a voicemail that I could hear the desperation in, even without listening to the words. "Hey Blake, can you come in today? We'd really appreciate your insight into this situation. There's some confusion about what's happening." Confusion. That's what they called the systematic dismantling of their revenue stream. But I wasn't confused at all. I was completely calm, sitting in my home office having just unplugged the empire I had built with 7 years of relentless sacrifice, one carefully severed contract at a time. And I had done it all without raising my voice, without a single angry word or dramatic confrontation. That's the thing about real power. It doesn't shout or make threats. Real power schedules its moves with precision and executes them with deadly calm. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the first email landed in Sterling Dynamics' general inbox with surgical precision. I sat back in my chair, the morning sun slanting through my apartment window, and watched the notification ping on my phone. It was beautifully mundane. A brief subject line reading, "Notice of Termination SLA number 2045, followed by a curt message body explaining that our agreement had ended effective immediately. No flourish, no dramatic language, just a clean severance that would change everything. I exhaled slowly, folding my hands in my lap as I absorbed the magnitude of what I had just set in motion. This was the culmination of 7 years of meticulous planning and systematically unacknowledged labor. As the seconds ticked by, additional notification pings echoed in quick succession. 9 of my corporations withdrew their contracts simultaneously, each message carefully staggered between 9 o'clock and 9:05 to avoid any suspicion of a technical glitch. My heart surprisingly did not race with adrenaline. The real rush had come days ago when I was drafting those notices in the quiet solitude of my home office. Now I felt only a calm certainty as I watched Sterling Dynamics bleed revenue in real time. The firm that had taken my dedication for granted was about to realize just how much of its lifeblood I had been quietly pumping through its veins for years. I lifted my mug of dark roast coffee, the steam curling upward like smoke signaling a revolt. I took a slow sip, savoring the bitter taste. It was harsh, yes, but invigorating in a way I hadn't experienced in years. It tasted like justice served cold. Outside my window, the city was awakening to another ordinary day. Horns honked in the distance, bike messengers wove through early morning traffic, and somewhere a coffee grinder roared to life. But inside Sterling's usually smooth exterior, I knew everything was fracturing. By 9:06, I saw the first real sign of panic spreading through their systems. An internal chat thread lit up with digital alarms. Urgent. Client XS SLA canceled. Who authorized this? Is our legal team aware of this development? This looks coordinated. Something's wrong. Emergency closing procedures need to be initiated immediately. The tolls of chaos I had unleashed were now thrumming beneath the firm's polished facade, like a fault line about to split wide open. I leaned forward slightly, thinning the distance between triumph and compassion as I watched it all unfold. I still remembered those late nights we had spent debating service-level adjustments, the collaborative spirit that had once defined Sterling's culture back when I believed we were building something together. But that world had died the moment Victoria replaced me with Ryan Torres, a boyfriend who had never once borne the weight of a global portfolio on his shoulders. At 9:08, a call came through from Victoria's assistant, her voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "Blake, there's an emergency meeting scheduled in 10 minutes. The CIO wants your input immediately." I nodded to myself, though she couldn't see me through the phone. I already knew they would beg for my help. I paused for a moment, tasting the irony of the situation. After all those years of offering strategic guidance that went unrecognized, I would now be summoned to help salvage the very crisis I had engineered. I texted back simply, "I'll be there," and closed the chat window, savoring the rush of power that coursed through me like electricity. Then I stood up from my desk, straightened my tie, half out of habit, half for ceremony, and walked confidently toward the door. When I entered Sterling's conference suite, I was greeted by a scene I would have once described in glowing terms for a company newsletter. State-of-the-art audiovisual equipment lined the walls. Ergonomic chairs surrounded a table, polished to a mirror finish, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline. Only now, the room smelled of panic instead of success. Half-empty coffee mugs sat forgotten on the table, their contents growing cold. Papers were strewn across the polished surface like fallen leaves after a storm, and every face in the room was drawn tight with fear and confusion. The usual air of controlled professionalism had evaporated, replaced by something much more primal and desperate. Ryan Torres sat at the head of the table, his posture collapsing inward as he scrolled frantically on his tablet, clearly overwhelmed by information he couldn't process. Victoria hovered near the presentation screen, her usually impeccable composure replaced by brittle tension that made her movements sharp and jerky. The CIO motioned urgently to an empty chair beside him. "Blake," he said, his voice wavering with barely concealed relief. "We need you here. We need your expertise." I sank into the offered seat, my eyes methodically flicking across the room to drink in every detail of the chaos I had orchestrated. The CFO was frantically flipping through balance sheets, his fingers trembling slightly as he tried to make sense of the numbers. The head of legal sat biting her lip, staring at her laptop screen as if willing it to provide answers. Investors on the conference call were demanding explanations through the speaker system, their voices sharp with anger and concern. I cleared my throat deliberately, letting the sound cut through the nervous chatter. "Good morning," I said evenly, each word measured and controlled. "I see there are some questions regarding our client portfolio." The room nodded collectively, relief and apprehension mingling in their expressions like oil and water. The CIO glanced nervously at Victoria, then back at me with something approaching desperation in his eyes. "Can you shed some light on why 15 of our top clients have terminated their SLAs simultaneously?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Silence settled over the conference room like a heavy fog. I tapped my pen against the polished table and began to explain with clinical precision. Each of these corporations is separate and legally distinct, but collectively they're responsible for 68% of our annual revenue, I said, letting that number sink in before continuing. Their SLAs were terminated for breach of service due to leadership instability and failure to meet contractual deliverables. Victoria's eyes widened, searching mine desperately for some sign of denial or explanation that would make this nightmare go away. I remained completely calm, my expression neutral and professional. "They cited a clear breach of confidence," I continued matter-of-factly. "Effective immediately. I've seen the notices myself, and the language is quite specific about the reasoning." Murmurs rose around the table like the sound of disturbed bees. The legal head whispered urgently, "But breaches! We've met every single metric and exceeded expectations for 7 consecutive years." I nodded slowly, as if considering her point. "That's precisely the issue," I replied. "No one noticed when I built this network of relationships over the years, and no one noticed when I systematically withdrew from it this morning." The board members exchanged glances loaded with meaning, sudden understanding, beginning to dawn on their faces. The CFO cleared his throat nervously and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Blake, what can we do to fix this situation?" I let the question hang in the air like smoke from a fire that was still burning. "I can reinstate these contracts one by one," I said slowly, "but only if leadership recognizes that loyalty and competence must be valued appropriately. Otherwise, these companies will find no compelling reason to return to Sterling." I watched as Victoria's face drained of color, the carefully maintained veneer of control cracking like ice under pressure. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then offered a trembling response. "Please, let's discuss terms. We can work this out." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "Recognition isn't a gesture or empty words," I said firmly. "It's an acknowledgement of tangible contributions and measurable value. You have my terms." As I stood to leave, the room felt smaller somehow, the lights harsher and more unforgiving. Phones had stopped ringing. Conversations had paused mid-sentence. Breaths were held in anticipation. I offered a polite nod to Victoria. No warmth, no forgiveness, just professional courtesy. And walked deliberately toward the door, each step echoing in the suddenly hushed space. Outside the boardroom, the hallway stretched before me like a runway to freedom. The empire I had helped build was indeed crumbling behind those closed doors, but from the ruins, I could already envision constructing something entirely new and better. I found myself smiling, not for revenge or petty satisfaction, but for the crystal clear clarity that had finally emerged from years of confusion. I had learned something fundamental that morning. True power isn't found in titles or photo opportunities. It lies in the ability to shape reality itself, to influence outcomes through strategic thinking and careful execution. And this morning, reality had bowed to my will in a way that felt both inevitable and liberating. 15 contracts had been terminated, not out of spite, but in exchange for acknowledgement that had been withheld for far too long. 68% of Sterling's revenue now hung suspended on a digital precipice, and I held the switch that could restore it or let it fall forever. Every empire eventually requires an architect bold enough to redesign its foundation when the original structure proves unstable. Today, I had become that architect. I walked into Sterling's glossy offices at exactly noon, the sliding glass doors parting like theatrical curtains to reveal the chaos that had erupted in my wake. The reception area, normally so pristine it felt almost sterile, was now littered with abandoned coffee cups, crumpled memos, and ringing phones wedged precariously between shoulders and ears as people tried to manage multiple crisis calls simultaneously. An executive assistant's eyes met mine briefly as I entered, her expression a mixture of profound relief and barely controlled panic, as though she had been waiting specifically for me to arrive and restore some semblance of order to the madness. Beyond the reception desk, the open-plan workspace had transformed completely into an impromptu crisis management center. Project managers huddled in tight circles, their heads bent low over laptops as they tried to make sense of contradictory information. Junior associates dashed back and forth between departments, clutching smartphones and looking like they were drowning in responsibilities they'd never been trained to handle. Somewhere in the distance, a printer churned out urgent documents continuously, the mechanical sounds punctuating the air with declarations of urgent immediate action required on every page. I paused in the middle of it all, letting the tenor of the room wash over me like a wave. The fluorescent lights glared overhead with unusual harshness, bouncing off glass partitions that had once projected an illusion of seamless productivity and professional efficiency. Now each cubicle looked like an individual lifeboat drifting helplessly on a stormy sea, its occupant clinging desperately to spreadsheets and slide decks as the tide of potential insolvency lapped dangerously at their heels. A flight of stairs led down to the trading desks, where I had once delivered impromptu tutorials on client relationship management to eager junior staff. Now, cables lay tangled across the floor like abandoned lifelines, and analysts sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the red barriers flashing across their dual monitors as profit graphs imploded in real time before their eyes. I strolled past them unhurried, my movements deliberate and calm. My suit felt different in this moment, less like a uniform I wore to fit in, and more like armor that protected me from the chaos swirling around me. Ryan Torres stood near the coffee station, his pastel shirt soaked at the collar from too many nervous gulps of caffeinated beverages. He was attempting to reassure an important investor via video call, his tone jittery and unconvincing as he tried to explain away the sudden coordinated slashes in service agreements. "We're working diligently to resolve this situation," he said into the camera, blinking rapidly as if the lens might somehow project stability he clearly didn't possess. The investor on the other end of the call shook his head with visible disdain, clearly unimpressed by Ryan's fumbling explanations, and ended the call mid-sentence without ceremony. Ryan's shoulders slumped in defeat, and I could see the weight of his inadequacy settling on him like a heavy blanket. I nodded at him in passing, my greeting measured and professional, then continued toward Victoria's corner office, where I knew the epicenter of this carefully orchestrated storm was waiting for me. Outside Victoria's office door, 2 staff members were speaking in animated, hushed tones, their voices carrying the kind of frantic energy that comes with genuine crisis. Their eyes were wide with disbelief as they tried to process what was happening to their supposedly stable company. "How does this even happen?" one asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but charged with confusion. 15 major clients just gone in one morning? It's impossible! The other shook her head vigorously, as if the motion could somehow make sense of the chaos. "It has to be sabotage or some kind of massive system error. Why would our backbone clients just quit on us like this?" There's no logical explanation. They both glanced at me as I approached, then fell into uncomfortable silence, waiting for my response or perhaps hoping I had answers that could restore their sense of security. I allowed them a moment to register my presence, letting them see 7 years of history folded into my confident gait, the weight of every proposal and contract I had ever touched reflected in my steady approach. Then I pushed through the door into Victoria's inner sanctum. Victoria stood at the far end of her spacious office, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline like a painting of power and success. The sunlight was slicing through the glass, illuminating her silhouette while casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floor. Papers were strewn across her normally immaculate desk in an entropy of reports, balance sheets, and crisis management documents that spoke to the morning's desperate scrambling. She spun around when she heard the door click closed behind me, her expression flickering rapidly through hope, confusion, and raw fear like a slideshow of emotions she couldn't control. The expensive heels she wore clicked sharply against the polished surface as she moved toward me, her arms outstretched in a gesture that seemed half embrace, half plea. "Blake, what is happening?" she asked, her voice trembling with desperation that made her sound smaller than I'd ever heard her. "Please, you have to help me understand this." I studied her face carefully, taking in every line and contour that reflected the broken trust between us. The soft curl of her hair, once so carefully arranged to project confidence and authority for board meetings and press photos, now seemed disheveled and uncertain. Her tailored jacket hung slightly off-kilter on her shoulders, a physical metaphor for the balance she had lost in every aspect of her professional life. I recognized this moment as her breaking point, the instant when she finally realized that her carefully constructed empire had been built on a foundation I had provided, and that foundation was now crumbling beneath her feet. I placed one hand casually in my pocket and held her gaze without wavering. "Market correction, I think," I said quietly, as if I were delivering a routine weather report rather than shattering her world into irreparable pieces. My tone was completely neutral, clinical even, an echo of the same detachment she had shown when she handed my promotion to Ryan Torres and called it nothing personal. She blinked rapidly, trying to parse the meaning behind my seemingly casual words, searching for some hint of the man who had once worked tirelessly beside her. "Or perhaps leadership instability," I added with the same matter-of-fact delivery. The corners of her mouth twisted downward as understanding began to bloom in her eyes like a terrible flower. She was starting to comprehend that this wasn't some external crisis or market fluctuation. This was something much more personal and devastating. "But you can fix this," she whispered, her words heavy with pleading and desperation. "These are your accounts, your companies. You built these relationships. You can make this right." I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us as the office seemed to shrink around our confrontation. The walls felt like they were pressing in, eager to witness the resolution of years of accumulated resentment and unacknowledged contribution. I lowered my voice so that only she could hear me, making this moment as intimate as it was devastating. "I was going to fix it," I said, each word carefully chosen and precisely delivered. "But then you gave my title to your intern with benefits." I didn't use Ryan's name. I didn't need to add any recrimination beyond that one pointed phrase that captured the essence of her betrayal perfectly. She flinched as if I had physically struck her, her lips parting as though to defend herself, then closing again as she realized there was no defense for what she had done. In her eyes, I could see the memory of every time she had taken my advice in private, while basking in public applause that should have been shared. Every late-night strategy session where I had guided her decisions. Every crisis I had helped her navigate. Every success I had architected from the shadows while she stood in the spotlight. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire, charged with the weight of 7 years of shared ambition and unspoken resentment that had finally reached its breaking point. Behind Victoria, through the glass walls of her office, I could see the company beyond struggling desperately to recover from my orchestrated exodus. A cluster of vice presidents paced the corridor anxiously, their terrified mutters escaping their lips like smoke from a fire they couldn't extinguish. Even here in the headquarters, she had ruled with such confidence just hours before, the air itself seemed a taste of panic and regret. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of desperation that comes when everything you thought was solid suddenly reveals itself to be built on sand. I straightened my tie slowly, a habit I had formed in countless boardrooms and crisis meetings long before today's calculated conflict. I turned slightly, nodding toward the panoramic window that showcased the city below us like a kingdom she was about to lose. "It's not too late," I said, my voice carrying both an offer and an ultimatum. "We can restore these agreements if you choose to acknowledge that I built them. But that acknowledgement needs to be real, substantive, and public." My words hung in the air between us like a lifeline thrown across a chasm of betrayal, but also like a bridge that could only be crossed on my terms. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly as she processed the full weight of what I was offering and what it would cost her to accept. Her voice was barely audible when she finally managed to speak, the words coming out fractured and uncertain. I'm sorry, Blake. Let me make this right. Please, just tell me how." She took a hesitant step toward me, her hand reaching out in a gesture of reconciliation. But I could see that her fingers were trembling with the magnitude of what she was facing. I watched her carefully, my heart tempered by a complex mix of satisfaction and genuine sorrow for what we had both lost. For years, I had stayed silent about my contributions, believing that our partnership would naturally blossom into equal recognition as the company grew. I had convinced myself that patience and loyalty would eventually be rewarded with the respect I had earned. Instead, my silence had been systematically mistaken for complacency, my dedication interpreted as a willingness to remain invisible forever. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door with measured steps. The click of my shoes echoed through the suddenly hushed office space like a countdown to an inevitable conclusion. Behind me, Victoria's voice rose in a desperate plea, but her words seemed to come from very far away. I didn't look back because I knew that the moment for genuine reconciliation had passed with the echo of those 15 termination notices. As the door slid shut behind me with a soft whisper, I was leaving behind more than just a crumbling enterprise. I was abandoning the illusion of a partnership that had been built on my unacknowledged labor and her unconscious exploitation of my loyalty. From this day forward, I would build something entirely new. Something anchored by recognition rather than hollow promises, respect rather than taken for granted devotion. The foundation would be solid this time, built on honesty rather than the echoes of titles withheld and contributions erased. The board assembled that same afternoon in the same hushed grandeur where I had once envisioned my own triumph, back when I still believed that hard work alone would eventually be rewarded. I stepped into the oak-paneled room, taking in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. The walls were adorned with framed mission statements and glossy photographs of triumphant teams celebrating victories I had helped engineer from behind the scenes. A single long conference table stretched before me, ringed by high-backed leather chairs occupied by faces I had known for years. Some of these people I had mentored during difficult transitions. Others had once vouched for my promotion back when they thought it was politically safe to do so. Today, they all looked at me with a mixture of weariness and desperate hope, like shipwreck survivors spotting a potential rescue vessel on the horizon. The CFO, noticeably pale and tremulous, gestured toward the chair at the far end of the table. "Blake, thank you for joining us on such short notice," he said, his voice barely concealing the relief that flooded through him at my presence. I nodded politely, but deliberately made my way to the center seat instead, positioning myself equidistant from all the watching eyes around the table. At the head of the table sat the board president, a man whose stoic demeanor rarely betrayed emotion even in the most stressful circumstances. As I settled into my chosen seat, he cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses with the careful precision of someone about to deliver momentous news. "We've convened this emergency session," he began, his tone measured and grave, "because we need immediate answers to questions that are threatening the very survival of this company. 68% of our income evaporated this morning, and we need someone to explain how that happened." The question hovered above us like an accusation waiting to be assigned to someone, anyone who could make sense of the chaos that had engulfed Sterling Dynamics in the space of a few hours. I inhaled slowly, scanning the circle of faces around the table with deliberate calm. Ryan Torres perched nervously beside Victoria, looking like a deer caught in headlights as he tried to process information far beyond his experience level. The CTO sat tapping a pen against a thick stack of financial reports, the rhythmic sound betraying his anxiety. The outside investors flickered on the video link, their corporate logos dancing at the edge of the screen like digital spectators to this corporate drama. In that moment, I watched as the polished veneer of authority peeled away from everyone in the room, revealing the raw vulnerability of a company that had been completely unprepared for its own fragility. These were people who had built their careers on projecting confidence and control. Yet now, they sat before me like students waiting for a teacher to explain a lesson they had failed to understand. I straightened my back and smoothed the creases in my jacket, then placed both palms flat on the polished conference table, as if to anchor myself in the gravity of what I was about to reveal. "I'd be happy to explain what happened this morning," I said, my voice calm but carrying an undertone of confidence that commanded attention. The board president inclined his head slightly, granting me permission to proceed with an explanation that everyone desperately needed to hear. I leaned forward slightly, making direct eye contact with each person around the table as I spoke. Each of the 15 corporations that terminated their SLAs this morning is independent, legal, and completely distinct from one another, I explained, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had built these relationships from the ground up. However, their contracts collectively generated 68% of Sterling's annual revenue. I paused to let that staggering number settle into their minds like a stone dropped into still water, watching the ripples of realization spread across their faces. Those agreements cited breach of service and failure to meet leadership obligations as their primary reasons for termination, I continued, sweeping my gaze around the room to ensure everyone was following the implications. The board has prioritized internal politics over actual performance by awarding the chief strategy officer role to an intern with no proven track record. In doing so, you signaled to our most important clients that loyalty and competence are secondary considerations to personal relationships. Murmurs rippled through the board members like waves breaking against a shore. Words like breach and failure echoed in whispered conversations as astonishment spread across the room. I paused deliberately, letting the weight of my revelation settle into every corner of the oak-paneled space. Our clients responded by exercising their legal right to withdraw from agreements they no longer considered reliable, I continued with clinical precision. They felt that working with a company that makes strategic decisions based on favoritism rather than merit represented an unacceptable business risk. Victoria's mouth opened and closed silently, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the conference table. Ryan's gaze shifted downward to the polished wood surface, avoiding mine entirely as the full scope of his inadequacy became apparent to everyone in the room. Across the table, the CFO shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly aware of the precariousness of his own position in a company that was hemorrhaging revenue. The board president's expression remained carefully neutral, though I could see his fingers drumming a rapid, nervous rhythm against his notepad. "You orchestrated this entire situation?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying both accusation and grudging respect. I nodded without hesitation. Yes, I arranged the terminations. I built those companies over several years to safeguard Sterling from complacency and to ensure we maintained strong client relationships. However, I did not expect to have to use them against Sterling itself. I paused, letting the full implications of my statement sink in before delivering the final blow. After 7 years of systematically unrecognized service, I felt obligated to demonstrate the real cost of overlooking genuine contributors in favor of political appointments. A silence descended over the room so thick that even the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud in comparison. It was the kind of quiet that comes when everyone present realizes that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed. The external investor on the video link was the first to break the silence, his voice trimmed by corporate courtesy but sharp with concern. "Is this vindictive action, Mr. Carter? Because if so, we need to involve our legal counsel immediately to assess our options." I met the camera's lens directly and replied with measured precision, "Not vindictive? Necessary." This is a lesson in accountability that was long overdue. If Sterling expects to remain a leader in this industry, it must learn to value merit over manipulation and substance over personal relationships. The screen flickered slightly as the investor absorbed my words, uncertainty etching itself across his features as he processed the implications of what I had just told him. Victoria cleared her throat and rose unsteadily to her feet, her posture betraying the tremor of desperation that was running through her entire body. The confidence that had once made her such a formidable presence in boardrooms had evaporated, leaving behind someone who looked fragile and uncertain. "Blake, please," she said, her voice quavering with emotion that she could no longer hide. "You know I never meant any harm. I made a terrible mistake, and I can see that now. We can rectify the situation together. We can promote you immediately, restore your proper title, even grant you equity in the company." She lifted a white envelope from beside her notes with trembling fingers, pressing it toward me across the polished table as though it contained all the world's apologies wrapped in legal documents and financial compensation. I reached past the envelope without even touching it, my gesture deliberate and unmistakable. "I don't want a title that's offered as damage control," I said, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. "I want genuine recognition and respect for the work I've already done. You had 7 years to give me that acknowledgement voluntarily. I no longer need Sterling's validation to know my worth." A collective gasp rose from the board members around the table, the sound echoing off the oak-paneled walls like a small explosion. Even the board president's eyebrows twitched upward, betraying his surprise at my rejection of what most people would consider a generous offer. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice firm, but carrying an undertone of genuine curiosity about what could possibly satisfy someone who had just turned down a promotion and equity. The question rippled through the room, carrying with it the gravity of a crossroads moment that would determine the future of Sterling Dynamics. I could feel every pair of eyes focused on me, waiting for an answer that would either save their company or seal its fate. I folded my hands carefully and studied the polished tabletop for a moment, tracing the wood grain with my gaze as I chose my words with surgical precision. "I want autonomy," I said at last, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I will offer to reinstate those contracts, but only under one specific condition." I paused, letting the weight of anticipation build in the room before delivering my ultimatum. "I want to serve as an independent partner with direct authority to oversee strategic partnerships, reporting only to this board itself, without any interference from Sterling's internal politics or management hierarchy." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. But inside this conference room, time seemed to have stopped entirely. "If you refuse these terms," I continued with calm finality, "those 15 clients will remain permanently with the companies I founded. Sterling will need to rebuild its client base from scratch, which, given the current market conditions and your reputation after today's events, will likely take years if it's possible at all." The conference table fell into stunned quiet that seemed to stretch on forever. Victoria's face flushed crimson with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She slammed her hand down on the table with enough force to rattle the water glasses, her composure finally cracking completely. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed, her voice rising with indignation. "Do you realize what you're asking for? You're demanding control over the very board that initially rejected your promotion. You're asking us to hand you the keys to the kingdom after you've essentially held us hostage." I lifted my chin slightly, meeting her outburst with unshakable calm. "I'm asking for the recognition I earned through 7 years of dedicated service and the respect that should have been extended to me long ago," I replied evenly. "If you want your clients back and your company to survive this crisis, this is the only path forward. If you're not willing to take it, I'll build something better with those clients as the foundation." Another profound silence filled the room as the board members processed the stark choice I had laid before them. The board members exchanged meaningful glances, their faces reflecting the weight of a decision that would reshape Sterling Dynamics forever. The CIO tapped his pen nervously against his notepad. The CFO cleared his throat but said nothing. One of the investors rubbed his chin thoughtfully, clearly calculating the financial implications of both accepting and rejecting my proposal. Finally, the board president spoke, his voice measured and deliberate like a judge, delivering a verdict that would change everything. "We will consider your proposal carefully," he said, each word chosen with the gravity the situation demanded. "We will convene tomorrow morning to discuss the terms you've outlined and their implications for the company's future." He paused, his gaze fixed on me with something that might have been respect mixed with wariness. "Until then, we request that you abstain from any further action that might affect our remaining client relationships or the company's operations." I nodded slowly, rising from my chair with the same deliberate precision I had used throughout this entire confrontation. "Understood?" I replied simply, my tone professional but carrying an undertone of quiet authority. As I walked toward the door, I could feel every head in the room turning to track my movement. The weight of 7 years of unseen labor and unspoken resentment had finally been laid bare on this polished conference table, and there was no going back to the way things had been before. I paused at the threshold, glancing back one final time at the tableau behind me. Victoria stood motionless, her face a mask of regret and dawning realization. The board president leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in contemplation of an impossible choice. The rest of the room seemed to shimmer with uncertainty and the kind of tension that comes when everything familiar suddenly becomes unpredictable. Then I closed the door gently behind me, leaving them to ponder the fallout of what I had delivered with quiet precision. A boardroom funeral for the old Sterling Dynamics and the birth announcement for whatever would rise from its ashes. Outside in the hallway, the afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating my path forward with a clarity that felt almost symbolic. I felt more alive than I had in years, knowing that I had finally shattered the old expectations that had confined me and carved a new direction from the remnants of broken promises and unacknowledged contributions. Victoria trailed behind me through the gleaming marble corridor, her heels echoing like the hesitant footsteps of someone seeking refuge from a storm of her own making. The boardroom doors had closed behind us, sealing away the stunned gasps and whispered conjectures that had followed my ultimatum like aftershocks from an earthquake. I paused at the intersection where the glass walls opened onto a vista of the city skyline, the buildings shimmering with the kind of indifferent grandeur that made human conflicts seem small and temporary. Victoria stopped a few paces behind me, her breathing uneven as though she had been running a race she had never intended to enter, much less win. I could feel the tension radiating from her posture, hear the tremor in her voice when she finally gathered the courage to speak. "Blake, please wait!" she called out, her words carrying a desperation I had never heard from her before. I turned slowly, resisting the natural urge to soften my expression or offer comfort. For 7 years, I had tempered my reactions for her sake, smoothing over disappointments and swallowing my pride to maintain harmony. Now I needed clarity more than consolation, truth more than diplomatic politeness. Victoria's face was drawn and ashen under the harsh fluorescent lights, every line etched by regret and unspoken apologies that seemed to weigh her down physically. She lifted a trembling hand toward me, a gesture that seemed to encompass everything she couldn't find words to express. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice thick and raw with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you the way I clearly have. None of this was ever personal, Blake. You have to believe me when I say that." I studied her carefully, recalling the day I had first walked into Sterling Dynamics' lobby with bright eyes and fierce determination, absolutely convinced this was where I would finally prove my worth to the world. She had embraced my ambition then, and I had dedicated myself completely to her success and ascent through the corporate hierarchy. But this moment was fundamentally different from all those that had come before, a reckoning that was unfiltered by boardroom facades or carefully crafted press releases. The air between us crackled with shattered expectations and the weight of years spent building something together that had ultimately excluded me from its rewards. I folded my arms across my chest, choosing my words with the same care I had used to draft those 15 termination notices. "You weren't scared of my power, Victoria," I said, each syllable deliberate and measured for maximum impact. "You were scared that I didn't need yours anymore." Her jaw tightened visibly, and for a moment, I thought she might snap back with the kind of arrogance that had once made her such a formidable negotiator in hostile takeover situations. Instead, she exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping as the full weight of my accusation settled upon her like a heavy blanket. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears that she was clearly fighting to control. "Name your terms," she whispered, her voice thin with the kind of desperation that comes when someone realizes they're completely out of options. "Just tell me what it will take to fix this." I inhaled the sterile scent of the corporate corridor, feeling the faint hum of the ventilation system resonating beneath our feet like the heartbeat of a building that was holding its breath. "I want recognition," I said steadily, my voice carrying the weight of 7 years of accumulated frustration. Not just in name or on paper, but in actual authority and decision-making power. I paused, watching her face as I outlined exactly what that recognition would look like in practical terms. "I want to reinstate those contracts, yes, but under my leadership as an equal partner, reporting directly to the board rather than through the management hierarchy that excluded me. I want equal ownership in the company I built just as much as you did. I want my title on the door and my voice in every strategic decision that affects Sterling's future." Victoria's eyes widened as she processed the full scope of what I was demanding, her gaze flicking toward the distant office lights as if searching for some kind of support that had already evaporated. That's a substantial request," she stammered, her tone fractured with uncertainty. "You know what that means for the existing power structure? The board will resist ceding that level of authority to you after they initially chose someone else for a lesser position." She bit her lower lip in the same nervous gesture she had always used during tense negotiations when the stakes were particularly high. But then her posture straightened slightly as determination flickered back into her gaze like a candle being relit. "But they respect you, Blake," she added, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "They respect what you've accomplished and what you've demonstrated today. I can convince them to accept your terms." I found myself remembering each negotiation where I had been the silent hand guiding her most celebrated triumphs. Every strategic decision where my expertise had shaped the outcome while she received the credit. I recalled how she had enthusiastically praised Ryan for proposals that were little more than bullet points I had supplied, watching her light up with excitement over ideas that had originated from my late-night research and analysis. "Respect isn't enough anymore," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of years of accumulated disappointment. "I want genuine partnership, shared responsibility, shared profit, shared authority in every meaningful decision. If you can't deliver that level of recognition and equality, then no apology, no title, no equity package will be sufficient to repair what's been broken here." A complex swirl of emotions crossed her face like weather patterns moving across a landscape, fear mixing with resolve, remorse bleeding into determination. She bit her lip thoughtfully, then exhaled slowly, nodding once as though anchoring herself to the magnitude of what I was demanding. "All right," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'll take your proposal to the board with my full support. I'll advocate for your role as an equal partner and chief partnership officer. Your name on the door, 50% equity, direct oversight of all client relations and strategic partnerships. I'll do whatever it takes to make this happen." Her voice wavered slightly, but I could hear genuine sincerity bleeding through the strain of the moment. This wasn't just damage control or desperate bargaining. She was finally acknowledging the reality of what I had built and what she had nearly destroyed through her thoughtless favoritism. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and bone-deep fatigue wash over me. It wasn't revenge I had been craving all this time. It was justice tempered by fairness and recognition for contributions that had been systematically minimized. When I opened my eyes again, I met her gaze directly. "That's the beginning of what needs to happen," I said, my tone carrying both firmness and a hint of the partnership we had once shared. "But understand this clearly. I won't be your secret advisor anymore, working behind the scenes while others take credit. You'll hear my voice in every board meeting. You'll see my decisions reflected in every contract we negotiate. This changes everything about how Sterling operates." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard as she processed the full implications of what equal partnership would actually mean. "I understand completely," she replied, her voice small but resolute. "And I accept those terms." Then she hesitated, her expression softening in a way that reminded me of the woman I had first fallen in love with years before. All the corporate ambition and political maneuvering had complicated our relationship. "I'm sorry, Blake," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For every night you missed with Jacob because of work commitments, I should have handled differently. For every anniversary dinner, I missed because I was chasing headlines and photo opportunities instead of appreciating what we had built together." Her voice cracked completely, and I felt an unexpected pang of sadness, not for myself and what I had endured, but for what we had both lost along the way to this moment of reckoning. I lowered my arms and took a step closer to her, closing some of the emotional distance that had opened between us like a chasm. "We both lost something important," I admitted, my voice gentler than it had been all day. I found myself recalling birthday parties I had skipped, anniversaries we had spent at separate ends of conference tables, family moments sacrificed on the altar of corporate success. "But this is our chance to rebuild everything properly this time," I continued, allowing hope to creep into my voice for the first time in months. "To create something based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than unspoken assumptions and unacknowledged contributions." She reached out tentatively, brushing her fingertips against my sleeve in a gesture that carried years of shared history and genuine affection. "Together," she agreed, her voice small, but carrying a note of determination that reminded me why I had once believed we could conquer the business world as a team. Then she squared her shoulders as though preparing herself for the battle ahead, straightening her jacket and smoothing her hair with the kind of purposeful movements that signaled a return to business mode. "Let's go back to the board," she said, her voice gaining strength and authority. "Let's present this partnership proposal together and show them that Sterling's future depends on recognizing and rewarding the people who actually built it." I felt a sense of cautious optimism as we began walking back toward the boardroom. We moved side by side down the corridor, no longer as husband and wife bound by invisible servitude and unequal recognition, but as potential equals preparing to forge a genuine business partnership built on mutual respect and shared authority. Behind us lay the wreckage of old assumptions and broken promises. The boardroom doors would open again shortly, but this time to an offer that represented both an ultimatum and an opportunity. A chance for the board to retain the man who had built their firm from the shadows by finally allowing him to step into the light. Ahead of us lay difficult negotiations, contentious debates, and the hard work of earning trust anew from board members who would need to completely reimagine Sterling's leadership structure. Yet, as we approached the threshold of the conference room, I felt a profound sense of calm purpose settling over me like armor. I had set my terms clearly and unambiguously. Victoria had not only accepted them, but committed to championing them before the board. Now it was time for Sterling's leadership to recognize the value that had always been there, unacknowledged but undeniable, working behind the scenes to ensure their success. We paused outside the heavy oak doors, and Victoria took a deep breath to center herself before what would likely be the most important presentation of her career. As she met my eyes, I nodded once. A silent affirmation that despite all the chaos and betrayal, we were finally aligned in purpose and vision. I reached for the handle and pushed the door open, stepping confidently into the room where my future and Sterling Dynamics' survival would be decided through honest negotiation rather than political maneuvering. 3 days later, I stood outside the minimalist glass facade of Phoenix Ventures' brand new headquarters, watching the morning sun reflect off polished steel and tinted windows like a mirror of possibility. The building rose before me with clean lines and modern architecture that spoke of innovation and forward momentum. It was surreal to think that this impressive structure, which I now called my own, represented one of the 15 companies I had quietly founded and nurtured in parallel with my career at Sterling Dynamics. I drew a slow, deliberate breath and walked through the revolving doors, the click of my leather shoes echoing through the spacious lobby like a private victory march. This sound was different from the tentative steps I had taken through Sterling's corridors for so many years. Here, I was no longer hidden behind Victoria's shadow or operating in the background of someone else's narrative. I felt the crisp air of true autonomy filling my lungs for the first time in my professional life. Inside, the reception area was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension and panic that was still gripping Sterling Dynamics even after our negotiations. The walls were adorned with abstract art that suggested motion and progress, while sleek wooden benches invited visitors to settle in comfortably. Under a carefully positioned recessed spotlight, a chrome-plated plaque bore the name Phoenix Ventures in elegant lettering. Beneath it, etched steel letters read, B. Carter, Founder and CEO, words that carried the weight of recognition I had fought so hard to achieve. I paused to take in this moment fully, feeling the satisfaction of acknowledgement settling over me like a perfectly tailored suit. Blake! Elena's voice called my name before I saw her emerge from the corner office with confident strides. There she was, Victoria's former executive scheduler, a woman who had always been indispensable, yet chronically underpaid despite her exceptional organizational skills and strategic thinking. She moved toward me with the kind of purposeful energy I had rarely seen from her during her time under Sterling's fluorescent lights. Gone was the nervous tension that had marked her interactions when she worked under Victoria's demanding schedule and impossible expectations. Now her shoulders were squared with confidence, her eyes bright with genuine purpose and enthusiasm. When she reached me, I shook her hand, immediately noticing the firmness of her grip and the direct way she met my gaze. "Welcome to your new office, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice warm with the kind of respect that had been so notably absent during my years at Sterling. I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, appreciating the moment while making an important correction. "Please," I said with a smile, "call me Blake. We're building something different here, something based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy for its own sake." She nodded enthusiastically, clearly appreciating the distinction. "Of course, Blake. Let me show you to your corner suite." We rode the glass elevator to the top floor, and I watched the city unfold beneath us like a living map of possibilities and opportunities. When the doors opened with a soft chime, I stepped into a spacious office bathed in natural light, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the skyline I had once only glimpsed from Sterling's boardroom during those rare moments when I was invited to present my work. The room was furnished with modern elegance that spoke of success without ostentation. A walnut desk polished to a deep, rich sheen dominated one wall, while a modular leather sofa was positioned perfectly for private meetings and informal consultations. A low credenza displayed a single sculpture of intertwined metal strands, symbolic of connection and collaboration, I assumed, values that would define Phoenix's culture. Elena moved to the desk and opened the top drawer, retrieving a sleek nameplate that she placed beside a slender glass vase holding a single white orchid. The flower seemed to glow in the morning light, its pristine petals a symbol of new beginnings and careful cultivation. "Founder and CEO," she said with obvious satisfaction, gesturing to the nameplate. "It suits you perfectly." I thanked her quietly, settling into the high-backed leather chair and feeling it adjust to my weight with engineered precision. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home in my own achievement, surrounded by recognition that had been earned rather than negotiated or fought for in boardroom battles. Behind me, Elena placed a framed photograph on the credenza, our former Sterling Dynamics client team celebrating a major contract win. I frowned slightly, uncertain about the appropriateness of displaying reminders of my previous workplace. "Is that appropriate?" I asked, gesturing toward the photo. She shook her head with understanding. "I thought you might want a reminder. Not of Sterling's collapse or the politics that drove you away, but of what you built and the relationships you cultivated. It's part of your journey, part of what brought you here." I studied the image more carefully, seeing my younger self beaming alongside Victoria and our team. Maps and charts were sprawled across the conference table, evidence of the meticulous planning that had gone into that particular victory. Then I smiled, finally understanding Elena's intention and wisdom. "Keep it," I said with appreciation. "You're right. It's part of the journey that led to this moment." Elena stepped out to retrieve my tablet and phone charger from the reception area, giving me a few moments alone to absorb the magnitude of what I had accomplished. While she was gone, I walked to the expansive window that dominated one wall of my office, feeling the energy of possibility stretching out before me like sunlight on concrete. The city hummed with activity beyond the glass people pursuing their ambitions, businesses growing and evolving, the constant pulse of commerce and innovation that never stopped. I felt connected to that energy in a way I hadn't experienced during my years at Sterling, where I had always been working towards someone else's vision rather than my own. Here at Phoenix, I would craft a new kind of sanctuary for talent that had been overshadowed, for innovative ideas that had been dismissed, for dedicated professionals who had been systematically undervalued by organizations that prioritized politics over performance. Phoenix wouldn't just be another corporate identity in a crowded marketplace. It would embody the principles I had fought so long to assert: meritocracy, genuine respect, and true partnership. When Elena returned, she handed me a printed agenda that outlined our strategic priorities for the first week of operations. The document was comprehensive and thoughtfully organized, evidence of the kind of attention to detail that had made her so valuable at Sterling, though her contributions had rarely been acknowledged there. I scanned the top line of the agenda. "Welcome to Phoenix Ventures Leadership Meeting, 2 p.m., Conference Room A." Beneath that heading lay a carefully curated list of former Sterling colleagues I had personally invited to join our team, people whose talents had been consistently overlooked despite their exceptional contributions. Sofia Martinez was first on the list, a brilliant strategist who had been passed over 3 times for promotions despite her uncanny knack for closing complex negotiations that others had given up on. Derek Johnson followed, an accounting prodigy whose financial models had caught the attention of Sterling's CFO, only to be buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and corporate favoritism. Then there was Priya Patel, whose quiet brilliance in user experience design had been overshadowed by louder personalities who took credit for her innovative solutions. I felt a surge of gratitude as I read through their names. These were people I had silently supported during my time at Sterling, professionals whose potential I had recognized even when the leadership structure refused to see their value. Now I had the opportunity to lift them to where they truly belonged, to create an environment where their talents could flourish without the constraints of office politics or personal favoritism. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I led our inaugural meeting in a polished conference suite, whose glass walls framed the city's bustling energy like a living artwork. The room was designed to encourage collaboration rather than intimidation, with comfortable seating arranged to promote equal participation rather than hierarchical positioning. Sophia arrived first, her characteristically sharp gaze softening into a relieved smile as she shook my hand with genuine warmth. There was something different about her demeanor. A confidence that had been suppressed at Sterling was now beginning to emerge. Derek followed closely behind, his briefcase in hand, and his posture reflecting the kind of professional pride that comes from being valued for actual contributions rather than political maneuvering. Priya drifted in moments later, exuding the quiet confidence that had always made her such an effective designer, though her input had often been overlooked in Sterling's male-dominated tech discussions. When all 3 were comfortably seated around the conference table, I addressed them directly, my voice carrying the respect and appreciation that had been so notably absent from Sterling's corporate culture. "Thank you for trusting me with this opportunity," I began, making eye contact with each of them in turn. "You all know what happened at Sterling Dynamics, and I won't dwell on the politics and favoritism that drove us away. What matters now is that Phoenix Ventures will be fundamentally different from what we left behind. Their nods were steady and their faces open, reflecting the cautious optimism of professionals who had been disappointed before, but were willing to believe in the possibility of something better. I outlined our vision with the kind of clarity that comes from years of frustrated planning finally finding its proper outlet. We'll focus on bespoke analytic services, agile supply chain integrations, and proprietary AI-driven decision tools, I explained, watching their eyes light up as they began to see the scope of what we could build together. We will deliver excellence that's uncompromised by internal politics or personal agendas. I made them a promise that carried the weight of all my own experiences with unrecognized contribution. We will build this company together, profit from its success together, and achieve recognition together. No one's work will be invisible here. No one's contributions will be minimized or credited to someone else. Sophia's eyes gleamed with the kind of excitement I had rarely seen from her during our Sterling days. Finally, she said with obvious relief, a place where our work speaks for itself rather than being filtered through someone else's ambitions. Derek leaned forward eagerly, his analytical mind already engaging with the possibilities. I'll set up completely transparent financial controls, he offered. Every team member will have access to the data they need to understand how their contributions affect our bottom line. Priya tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notebook, her designer's mind already visualizing solutions. I can begin recruiting additional talent immediately, she suggested. There are so many capable people still trapped in situations like we just escaped from. With every affirmation and enthusiastic response, I felt our sanctuary for overlooked talent solidifying into something real and sustainable. This wasn't just about building another consulting firm. We were creating a refuge for professionals whose abilities had been systematically undervalued, a place where recognition would be based on results rather than relationships. Over the following days, Phoenix's communications team worked diligently to draft a press release that would announce our emergence to the industry. The headline read, "Phoenix Ventures emerges as industry disruptor under Blake Carter's leadership." The document included carefully crafted quotes from respected industry analysts who predicted rapid growth and market impact, positioning us as a fresh alternative to the stagnant corporate cultures that dominated our sector. Social media channels buzzed with excitement as word spread about our launch. Professional networks lit up with discussions about our innovative approach to talent recognition and client service. The business press took notice, with several publications reaching out for interviews and feature stories about our unique organizational philosophy. Meanwhile, Sterling Dynamics' public relations department remained entangled in crisis management, their communications team working overtime to draft statements and responses to increasingly difficult questions from investors and clients. Their brand had become tarnished by headlines like Sterling's sudden collapse, "When favoritism betrays a firm," and "The Hidden Architect, How One Man's Departure Crippled a Corporate Giant." Every time I saw Sterling mentioned in industry publications or social media discussions, I felt a complex mixture of pity and vindication wash over me. Pity for the talented people still trapped within their dysfunctional structure, struggling to rebuild relationships and restore confidence that had been shattered by poor leadership decisions. And vindication for my own choices. Validation that I had been right to demand recognition and build something new rather than continuing to work in the shadows of someone else's ambition. Late one afternoon, Elena knocked on my office door and entered carrying a steaming cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the space as she approached my desk. "They're starting to call," she reported with obvious satisfaction. "Potential clients are reaching out. Former colleagues are asking about opportunities, and media outlets want interviews. Everyone wants to know what Phoenix Ventures will do next." I smiled, draining my cup and feeling the satisfying burn of caffeine that had fueled so many late nights of strategic planning. I tapped my fingertips against the polished surface of my desk, a habit I had developed during years of complex negotiations. "Let them call," I replied with quiet confidence. "We're ready for whatever opportunities come our way." That evening, I deliberately stayed behind after the rest of the team had gone home to finalize contracts with our first wave of clients. These were companies that had once been the backbone of Sterling's revenue stream, businesses that understood the value of the relationships I had carefully cultivated over years of dedicated service. As I initialed each page and slid the signed documents across the desk to Elena, who had volunteered to stay late to help process the paperwork, I felt the profound satisfaction of completing a full circle. Where once I had crafted similar deals in Sterling's shadow, Working behind the scenes while others received credit and recognition, now I was signing them in the full light of acknowledged leadership. Every signature was a testament to my rightful place at the helm of strategic partnerships. Every contract a vindication of the expertise that had been systematically minimized for far too long. These weren't just business agreements. They were declarations of independence from a system that had undervalued my contributions while profiting from my expertise. I locked the office and walked to the expansive window that dominated one wall, watching the city lights begin to sparkle as dusk settled over the urban landscape. In the glass reflection behind me, I could see the image of a man who had finally shed the constraints that had held him back for years. The soft glow from my desk lamp illuminated the white orchid Elena had placed beside my nameplate, its pristine petals seeming to capture and reflect the light like a beacon of new possibilities. With the city sprawling below me and the satisfaction of a successful first week settling into my bones, I knew that I had built something far more significant than just another consulting firm. I had created a sanctuary where genuine talent was honored, where hard work was rewarded, and where recognition was never withheld from those who earned it through dedication and results. And as I turned off the lights and stepped into the elevator, I carried with me a promise that I would never again be invisible in my own success. The man who had once worked tirelessly behind the scenes, crafting victories for others to claim, had finally stepped into the spotlight he had always deserved. In the weeks that followed my official unveiling as founder and CEO of Phoenix Ventures, I devoted every waking hour to building a corporate culture that valued talent over titles and substance over empty gestures. My first priority was extending genuine second chances to those brilliant minds that Victoria had systematically overlooked during her tenure at Sterling Professionals. I had watched struggle in hushed corridors while their accomplishments were downplayed in favor of flashy presentations and boardroom theatrics. Sophia Martinez had been passed over 3 times for promotions at Sterling, despite her uncanny ability to close complex negotiations that other senior staff had abandoned as impossible. When she answered my call offering her a senior partnership role at Phoenix, I could hear the cautious optimism in her voice, tempered by years of disappointment and broken promises. When she walked into my corner office on her first day, her posture carried hints of the uncertainty that comes from being let down repeatedly by organizations that talk about merit while practicing favoritism. I greeted her with a firm handshake and made her a clear, unambiguous promise that would define our working relationship. Here, your ideas will carry weight in every strategic decision we make, I told her, looking directly into her eyes so she could see the sincerity behind my words. Your voice will shape our strategy, and your contributions will be recognized publicly and rewarded financially. No more working in the shadows while others take credit. The surprise in her expression gradually melted into genuine resolve, and I knew we were establishing the foundation for something special, a partnership based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical exploitation. Next on my recruitment list was Derek Johnson, the accounting prodigy whose innovative financial models had caught the attention of Sterling's CFO, only to be buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and corporate favoritism that valued connections over competence. Derek had developed risk assessment algorithms that could transform uncertainty into strategic opportunity, but his groundbreaking work had been consistently overshadowed by flashier presentations from less capable colleagues. Derek arrived at Phoenix clutching a slim portfolio of his most ambitious projections, charts and graphs that revealed patterns in market data that others missed, financial models that could predict and mitigate risks before they became problems. We met over a single espresso in Phoenix's comfortable cafe nook, where morning sunlight filtered through low-hung pendant lights, creating an atmosphere of relaxed professionalism that was completely different from Sterling's sterile conference rooms. He leaned in across the small table, his excitement barely contained, but tempered by years of watching his innovations disappear into committee reviews and bureaucratic dead ends. "I've been ready for a chance like this for years," he said, his voice carrying both hope and the wariness that comes from repeated disappointments. I nodded, already envisioning the streamlined financial controls and transparent reporting systems he would implement at Phoenix. "You'll have complete autonomy over budgeting and forecasting," I promised him. "No gatekeepers filtering your recommendations, no hidden agendas affecting your data analysis, no committees that exist solely to slow down innovation." His smile was the kind I'd been chasing for years during my time at Sterling, the expression of a talented professional finally being offered the recognition and resources they deserved. Then there was Priya Patel, whose quiet brilliance in user experience design had been systematically overshadowed by louder personalities who excelled at self-promotion, but lacked her intuitive understanding of what clients actually needed. Priya had built interfaces so elegant and functional that clients consistently praised their ease of use. But internally at Sterling, her work was routinely credited to entire teams rather than acknowledged as her singular vision and expertise. When she accepted my offer to join Phoenix as head of product design, she arrived with a modest laptop and a notebook filled with sketches so meticulous and thoughtful they looked like works of art. Each drawing represented hours of careful consideration about how users would interact with our systems, how information should flow, and how technology could serve human needs rather than creating barriers. In our first comprehensive brainstorming session, she laid out an ambitious plan for a revolutionary client portal that would set new industry standards for accessibility, functionality, and user insight. Her presentation was methodical and compelling, backed by research and user testing that demonstrated her deep understanding of client needs and technological possibilities. I leaned back in my chair, watching her explain her vision with the kind of passion that comes from finally having an audience that appreciates expertise over political maneuvering. I realized that she had been waiting for this kind of platform her entire career, an opportunity to implement her ideas without having them filtered through layers of management or diluted by committee input. Together, our core team gathered regularly at the grand conference table that overlooked the city skyline, which by evening flickered with the warm glow of countless office windows representing ambition and opportunity across the urban landscape. Our team had assembled organically, experts in strategy, data science, design, and operations, each one carefully recruited from the ranks of the systematically undervalued. I opened one of our pivotal planning meetings with a declaration that would define Phoenix's culture. At Phoenix Ventures, second chances aren't charity or corporate social responsibility, I said, making eye contact with each team member to emphasize the importance of what I was saying. They're strategic advantages that give us access to talent our competitors have overlooked or underutilized. I watched their eyes light up as I unveiled our comprehensive roadmap for growth and innovation. We're building a sanctuary for the best minds who have ever been denied the spotlight they deserve, and that sanctuary will become our competitive advantage in the marketplace. The plan included cross-functional teams empowered to set their own goals and timelines, a deliberately flat organizational structure that prioritized collaboration over command hierarchies, and an innovative profit-sharing model that aligned individual success with company growth in transparent, measurable ways. Sophia tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notebook and said, "We'll need to completely redefine our brand voice to reflect this ethos of recognition and merit. Our marketing should emphasize substance over style, results over rhetoric." Derek chimed in with characteristic analytical precision. "Our financial projections must include substantial contingency reserves for rapid scaling. Market volatility should be our friend rather than our enemy. We can capitalize on opportunities that more rigid organizations miss." Priya moved to the whiteboard and began sketching wireframes with fluid, confident strokes. "Our clients will navigate our platforms in ways they didn't even know were possible," she explained, her voice gaining strength as she described her vision. "We'll anticipate their needs and provide solutions before they realize they need them." Each contribution built naturally on the previous one, creating a synergy that I had never experienced during my years at Sterling. I felt a surge of pride, not in having orchestrated this collaboration, but in witnessing the kind of innovation that emerges when talented people are finally given the resources and recognition they need to excel. Meanwhile, word of our rapid progress and innovative approach traveled fast through industry networks and professional circles. Former Sterling colleagues began reaching out with increasing frequency, their messages reflecting a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and barely concealed envy. These weren't just casual inquiries, they were serious offers of partnership, detailed questions about equity opportunities, and requests for meetings to discuss potential collaboration. Each message served as a testament to the shifting tides in our industry, evidence that Phoenix's reputation for recognizing and rewarding talent was already reshaping how professionals thought about their career trajectories. But I remained laser-focused on execution rather than expansion, determined to build our foundation on solid principles before pursuing rapid growth. I made a deliberate investment in creating personalized onboarding experiences for every new team member, ensuring that each person who joined Phoenix felt genuinely welcomed and valued from their very first day. Rather than the impersonal orientation sessions that were standard at most corporations, I developed tailored roadmaps for each new hire, complete with one-on-one mentorship sessions that connected them directly with senior team members who shared their areas of expertise. One of my proudest innovations was the recognition wall we installed in Phoenix's main lobby, a dynamic display featuring high-quality photographs of our team members alongside detailed captions highlighting their specific achievements and contributions to our success. This wasn't corporate window dressing or empty gesture toward employee appreciation. It was a tangible commitment to making sure that exceptional work received the public acknowledgement it deserved. When Sophia secured our first Fortune 500 client under the Phoenix banner, a comprehensive analytics contract that had been considered impossible to win by industry standards, her photograph went up in the lobby within hours of closing the deal. The accompanying caption detailed her negotiation strategy, highlighted the innovative approach that had differentiated our proposal, and quantified the revenue impact of her success. It was a moment of profound validation, watching her stand before that display with genuine pride as colleagues and visitors read about her achievement. This was the kind of recognition she had earned repeatedly at Sterling, but had never received, and seeing her finally get the public acknowledgement she deserved felt like a small victory against the systemic undervaluation that plagued our entire industry. As we celebrated our first quarter results in Phoenix's main conference room, the atmosphere was electric with shared accomplishment. Our revenue growth had surpassed even the most optimistic projections that Derek had modeled during our initial planning sessions. Client satisfaction scores were setting new benchmarks for our industry, with testimonials praising not just our results, but our responsiveness, transparency, and collaborative approach to problem solving. I found myself reflecting on the stark contrast between my two professional worlds as I walked through our bustling office space that evening. At Sterling, my most significant efforts had fueled someone else's narrative, contributing to a story where I remained perpetually in the background. Every success had been filtered through Victoria's public persona, every achievement credited to her leadership, while my contributions remained invisible to everyone except the clients who worked with me directly. At Phoenix, every milestone felt deeply personal because it represented genuine collaboration rather than hierarchical exploitation. Every victory was shared equally among the people who had contributed to making it possible. The energy in our office was contagious, fueled by the belief that our individual success was directly connected to our collective mission of elevating undervalued talent. I paused during my evening walkthrough to watch Priya demonstrating an early prototype of our new client interface to a potential Fortune 100 client via video conference. Her presentation was confident and compelling, backed by user research and technical innovation that clearly impressed the prospect. Nearby, Derek was deep in complex analytics on his dual monitors, developing risk models that would give our clients unprecedented insight into market volatility. In another corner of the office, Sophia was engaged in a spirited but professional debate with a prospective client about international market expansion strategies, her expertise evident in every point she made and every question she anticipated. Their energy was infectious, their belief in our mission unwavering, and their commitment to excellence obvious in everything they did. In the midst of this whirlwind of growth and success, one unexpected phone call managed to surprise me more than all the others combined. Ryan Torres, fresh from what I could only assume was a 2-week retreat in Bali meant to help him process his spectacular failure at Sterling, left a hesitant voicemail on my direct line. "Blake, it's Ryan," his message began, his voice carrying the uncertain tone of someone who had finally realized the magnitude of his own incompetence. I wanted to reach out because I'm available if you ever need advice on youth engagement strategies or if there are ways I could contribute to what you're building at Phoenix." I smiled at the absurdity of the offer, appreciating the unintentional comedy of the situation. After everything that had happened, after the spectacular collapse he had helped precipitate through his inexperience and Victoria's favoritism, he was offering to advise the company that had risen from the ashes of his failure. "No, Ryan, thank you," I said to myself as I deleted the voicemail. But no, our sanctuary wasn't built for interns recovering from jet lag and wounded egos. It was built for professionals who had weathered real storms and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. Phoenix Ventures had been founded on principles of merit, experience, and proven capability. We had no place for the kind of entitled incompetence that had contributed to Sterling's downfall, regardless of how it was packaged or presented. Victoria's offers of equity and partnership continued to hover at the edge of my inbox, like persistent reminders of a chapter I had definitively closed. Her messages arrived with increasing frequency and growing desperation, each one promising greater concessions and more substantial recognition than the last. But I had moved far beyond that chapter of my professional life, and her attempts at reconciliation felt like echoes from a world I no longer inhabited. When I finally took the time to compose a response to her persistent outreach, I wrote with the clarity that comes from absolute certainty about one's chosen path. Thank you for the continued offers, but my future is here with the people who believed in my capabilities before it became politically convenient to acknowledge them. I clicked send and felt the profound freedom that comes from making choices based on principle rather than expedience. That single email represented the final severance of ties that had once bound me to an organization that had systematically undervalued my contributions while profiting from my expertise. By the end of our first quarter, Phoenix Ventures' brand was being recognized throughout the industry as a legitimate disruptor, rather than just another startup with ambitious claims. Major business publications featured comprehensive profiles of our leadership team, and each article centered on the same compelling theme: the systematic elevation of previously undervalued talent. Clients consistently praised our responsiveness and unprecedented transparency in an industry known for opacity and bureaucratic delays. Competitors watched with barely concealed unease as our momentum continued building month after month. Trade publications ran analysis pieces trying to decode the Phoenix formula for rapid growth and exceptional client satisfaction. But more importantly than external recognition, within the walls of our headquarters, a culture of genuine respect and collaboration was thriving in ways that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of innovation that emerges when brilliant people are finally given the resources and authority they need to implement their best ideas. I often found myself standing at our recognition wall during quiet moments, reading the detailed captions that accompanied each team member's photograph. Each entry told a story of professional redemption and validated expertise that had been overlooked for far too long. I would remember the countless nights Sophia had stayed up perfecting pitch decks that others would present and claim credit for, or the weekends Derek had sacrificed to fine-tune risk models that saved companies millions while he received nothing more than a standard salary and perfunctory thanks. Each photograph represented not just individual achievement, but collective vindication of the principle that recognition should be granted rather than withheld, that talent should be celebrated rather than exploited, and that expertise should be rewarded rather than taken for granted. As I sat in my glass-walled office one late evening, overlooking the city lights that stretched to the horizon like a constellation of human ambition and possibility, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment that went far beyond professional success or financial achievement. I had not only built a thriving company from the ground up, I had vindicated the hidden strengths and overlooked capabilities of brilliant people who had been systematically marginalized by organizations that prioritized politics over performance. Phoenix Ventures was more than a successful business venture. It was a living testament to what becomes possible when recognition is granted freely rather than hoarded by those who mistake titles for talent. And as I leaned back in my chair, watching the city pulse with energy and opportunity beyond my windows, I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of what we could accomplish together. The second chances we had created and nurtured at Phoenix would continue to reshape entire industries, redefining what it meant to succeed through collaboration rather than exploitation, merit rather than manipulation. One evening, well past the hour when most office buildings dimmed their lights and emptied their corridors, I sat alone in my corner suite at Phoenix Ventures. The city skyline stretched before me like a glittering tapestry of ambition and possibility, while the glow from my monitor illuminated spreadsheets filled with analytics and projections that told the story of our remarkable growth. But my mind drifted inevitably to Sterling Dynamics and the chaos I had deliberately left behind in what felt like another lifetime. A soft electronic chime announced the arrival of a new message in my inbox, and when I glanced at the sender's name, I felt my heart skip a beat with unexpected emotion. It was Victoria, and her email address appeared unusually unadorned by the corporate signature and legal disclaimers that had once marked all her official correspondence. The subject line was stark in its simplicity: "We're selling." My chest tightened as I clicked the message open and scrolled through her words, each sentence carrying the weight of institutional collapse and personal defeat. She wrote that Sterling's board, still reeling from the catastrophic revenue loss and ongoing public relations disaster, had made the decision to sell the entire company to a private equity firm before the end of the month. She admitted with painful honesty that she would be replaced immediately as part of the acquisition, stripped of the CEO title that had defined her professional identity, watching her carefully curated legacy unravel in real time. Yet beneath the news of her professional downfall, she conveyed something more deeply personal, a regret that seemed to reach beyond corporate failure into the realm of human relationships and broken trust. "I never meant to hurt you," she wrote with the kind of vulnerability I rarely remembered seeing from her during our years of working together. "And I never meant to squander what we built together through my own fears and insecurities. Please understand that in the end I was terrified of my own mistakes and the possibility that I didn't deserve the success we had achieved." I leaned back in my leather chair, feeling it creak softly beneath me as 1,000 memories played across my mind like scenes from a film I had once starred in, but could now observe from a comfortable distance. The late nights we had spent collaborating on strategic initiatives, the whispered debates over financial forecasts at 4 in the morning when deadlines loomed, the small victories I had quietly engineered that she had publicly celebrated as evidence of her leadership capabilities. I felt the familiar ache of old betrayal, but it was tempered now by the emotional distance I had created through building something entirely new and successful. Phoenix Ventures was thriving on principles of transparency and mutual respect, principles that Victoria had abandoned in favor of political expedience and personal favoritism. I composed my response with deliberate care, choosing each word to carry the precise weight of my conviction and the finality of my decision. The message was brief, but devastating in its clarity. "You weren't scared of my power, Victoria. You were afraid you didn't need it." It was a perfect mirror of what I had told her in the hallway of Sterling's offices on that pivotal day when I had finally reclaimed my own worth and walked away from years of unacknowledged contribution. I paused after typing the words, reading the line again to ensure it carried exactly the impact I intended. A surgical strike that captured the essence of her fear and the root of her betrayal. Then I pressed send with the same calm decisiveness I had used when terminating those 15 contracts that had brought Sterling to its knees. Almost instantly, a reply notification appeared on my screen. But rather than offer any further apology or attempt at persuasion, I chose the power of silence over continued engagement. I knew instinctively that responding again would be to reopen a door I had firmly and permanently closed. Victoria now had her own difficult path to walk, one where I would no longer serve as guide, advisor, or silent architect of her success. She would have to navigate her professional rehabilitation without the invisible support system I had provided for so many years. Instead of dwelling on the past, I turned my attention back to the work that truly mattered, pulling up detailed profiles of prospective clients I had personally invited to our next Phoenix strategy session. I began drafting meeting invitations for Sophia, Derek, and Priya, already envisioning the innovative solutions and creative approaches they would bring to our upcoming challenges. As I typed, I felt the calm assurance that comes from being a man who had successfully rebuilt his entire professional life on solid foundations of respect and genuine collaboration. Every keystroke represented a choice to move forward rather than look backward, to build rather than dwell on destruction. Minutes later, another electronic chime announced an incoming call from a Sterling board member I had never met in person, someone who had been brought in during the chaos following my departure to help manage the crisis I had precipitated. Curious about what this conversation might reveal, I answered the call. His voice carried a mixture of tremulousness and professional courtesy as he thanked me for my candor during the board meetings that had preceded Sterling's collapse. He acknowledged with painful honesty that without my intervention and the stark lesson I had delivered, the potential sale of the company might have collapsed entirely, leaving Sterling in an even worse position. Then came the request I had been half expecting. He asked if I would consider serving as an advisor to the incoming leadership team that would take control post-acquisition. The irony was palpable. The very people who had once systematically overlooked my contributions were now desperately seeking my expertise to help salvage what remained of their organization. I muted the call for a moment, allowing myself to savor the full scope of this reversal of fortune. These were individuals who had dismissed my promotion, ignored my strategic recommendations, and participated in a culture that valued personal relationships over professional competence. Now they were essentially begging for my guidance to help them navigate the consequences of their own poor judgment. I declined the offer with polite but firm resolve, explaining that I was fully committed to Phoenix's vision and had no interest in consulting for organizations that had failed to recognize talent when it was offered freely. The board member's disappointment was audible even through the digital connection, but he accepted my decision with the grace of someone who understood he had no leverage to negotiate. By the time I closed my laptop and prepared to leave the office, the drafting table beside my desk had been cleared of the day's work. My tablet and stylus glowed softly in the dim light like torches, illuminating the path to continued innovation and growth. I stood and moved to the recognition wall in the hallway outside my office, taking a moment to trace the photographs of my team's achievements with my eyes. Client testimonials praising our responsiveness and innovation, snapshots from company retreats where genuine camaraderie was evident, headlines celebrating Phoenix's rapid growth and industry impact. Each image served as a reminder of why I had chosen to build something new, rather than attempt to salvage something fundamentally broken. On my way out of the building, I noticed an encrypted message waiting on my phone from a trusted former Sterling colleague who had witnessed the entire saga unfold from within the organization. The message was simple but profound. "We all wish we had recognized your value sooner and supported you when it mattered." I tapped a brief reply that captured both forgiveness and finality. Better late than never, but I found my place where recognition isn't rationed. Then I locked the office building behind me and descended in the elevator, listening to the gentle hum of the machinery against the distant roar of downtown traffic below. The contrast felt symbolic. The smooth, efficient operation of Phoenix compared to the chaotic noise of the world I had left behind. Later that night, as I relaxed in my apartment with its panoramic view of the city lights stretching to the horizon, I took time to reflect on the remarkable trajectory that had brought me to this point. From overlooked strategist at Sterling Dynamics to architect of a thriving sanctuary where talent flourished without the constraints of office politics or personal favoritism. Victoria's final email had signified the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that I had already moved far beyond. My future lay not in the wreckage of Sterling's collapse, but in the bright minds I continued to nurture, and the innovative solutions we crafted together as equals rather than as hierarchical subordinates. I poured a glass of water and raised it in a silent toast to the journey, one that had been defined not by titles that were awarded or taken away by others, but by the recognition we earn when we choose to build, uplift, and lead with integrity and genuine respect for human capability. I don't believe in revenge, but I do believe in reminders. Every morning, as sunlight filters through the blinds of my corner office at Phoenix Ventures, my gaze settles naturally on a particular frame that sits beside my desk. It holds what might seem like an ordinary piece of corporate correspondence, but it represents so much more than that. The frame contains the Sterling promotion email that began this entire journey, the message that changed everything about how I understood my worth and my place in the professional world. The subject line still reads exactly as it did that devastating day. To Blake Carter, subject, position filled. Below that, the body of the email delivers its crushing blow with corporate efficiency. Message, nothing personal. Underneath the original email, in bold gold letters that catch the morning light, I added my own annotation in elegant script. Recognition isn't given, it's taken. Those 6 words encapsulate everything I learned about power, respect, and the necessity of advocating for your own worth in a world that will gladly exploit your contributions while denying you credit. That frame is far more than office decoration or a trophy commemorating past victories. It's a daily testament to the moment I chose myself over unnoticed servitude, the instant I decided that my expertise and dedication deserved acknowledgement rather than exploitation. It represents the pivotal decision to demand recognition rather than hope for it, to create my own opportunities rather than wait for others to grant them. I often imagine Victoria encountering that frame if she were ever to visit my office, seeing her own dismissive words preserved and recontextualized as a monument to the consequences of undervaluing talent. I picture her reading my added notation and feeling the full weight of its message about the power dynamics she had so carelessly manipulated. But for me, the frame isn't about her regret or anyone else's belated recognition of what they lost when they chose favoritism over merit. It's about the promise I made to myself 7 years ago when I could have begged, pleaded, or accepted diminished status. Instead, I orchestrated my own liberation through strategic planning and precise execution. Each glance at that frame reminds me that silent labor deserves acknowledgement, that unseen hands can still shape destinies, and that true power lies in the ability to create value that others cannot ignore or replicate. It's a daily affirmation that the only validation that truly matters is the legacy we choose to create for ourselves. Behind me, my team at Phoenix buzzes with the kind of productive energy that comes from genuine recognition and shared purpose. Sophia is in the process of closing another multinational deal that will expand our global footprint significantly. Derek is finalizing quarterly forecasts that show continued growth and market penetration beyond our most optimistic projections. Priya is putting the finishing touches on the next generation of our client portal, incorporating user feedback and technological innovations that will set new industry standards. They all know my story by now. They can recite the headlines about how 68% of Sterling's revenue evaporated overnight when I terminated those 15 contracts. They understand the strategic precision behind Phoenix's rise from the ashes of Sterling's collapse. Yet they don't see the frame and my private annotation as arrogance or vindictiveness, but rather as inspiration and proof that resilience combined with strategic courage can rewrite any narrative. Today, I have a full schedule of back-to-back meetings that represent the kind of opportunities I once only dreamed of having. There's a comprehensive pitch presentation to a major prospect in the renewable energy sector, a detailed workshop on our innovative equity sharing model that's attracting attention from business schools and consulting firms, and a late lunch meeting with a former Sterling executive who has sought my counsel on navigating corporate transitions. I approach each engagement with the same calm confidence I cultivated on the morning I sent those 15 termination notices. I've learned that true power lies not in dramatic gestures or emotional outbursts, but in purposeful actions executed with precision and unwavering commitment to principle. As noon approaches, I step out onto the private terrace adjoining my office, where the city skyline stretches endlessly before me. Glass towers reflect blue sky and white clouds, creating a visual metaphor for the limitless possibilities that await those bold enough to seize them. I inhale deeply, savoring this moment of pause before the afternoon's demanding schedule. My phone vibrates with a congratulatory message from a board member at the private equity firm that acquired Sterling's remaining assets. It's a message of belated respect for my role in steering the sale process responsibly, acknowledgement that my intervention had ultimately saved them from acquiring a completely worthless shell of a company. I let the notification sit unread for now, choosing not to engage with validation from a world I no longer need approval from. Instead, I turn back toward my office, ready to dive into the afternoon's work with the focus and energy that comes from building something meaningful rather than merely reacting to others' decisions. I pause at the framed email one final time, offering a private nod to both the man I once was and the man I've become through deliberate choice and strategic action. The notation beneath the original message isn't bitterness or resentment. It's affirmation of a fundamental truth about power, respect, and recognition in the modern professional world. I forced recognition when it was withheld, reclaimed my worth when it was denied, and built something better when existing structures proved inadequate. Every day, that frame reminds me that the only validation that truly matters is the legacy we choose to create for ourselves through our actions, our principles, and our refusal to accept less than we deserve. And every day, as I continue building Phoenix Ventures into something that will outlast any individual ego or corporate politics, that frame serves as both reminder and promise that recognition earned through merit and maintained through excellence is the most powerful foundation for lasting success.